Okay. Like here's
Yeah.
here's my advice. Choose Prague. Okay. Because I'll tell you why. Because your resale potential there is higher than your resale potential here if you ever decide to resell.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, and I think it's always a buyer's market. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy because the retail agencies are going to present this limited supply, high demand. It's simple. It's really simple marketing, right? The
Yes.
retail agencies are going to present this limited supply, high demand, and they're going to get people to, you know, play against each other. And uh, I don't think it's good to get involved in that kind of scenario. And also, from a personal perspective, my personal strategy would be always to to keep the resale option open, because the worst thing that can happen is
Mm.
that you end up with a piece of land or property that you can't resell,
Mm.
because then you are, you know, it's your hands are tied and
Mm.
you're stuck. Every piece of property is both a piece of freedom and a limitation at the same time.
Mm.
It's freedom because it's yours and you can do what you want with it, but it's not because you pay taxes. But you can have the idea that it's yours. Um, and I think eventually that's going to disappear. Prices are just going to skyrocket until they disappear, and until the prices are so high that you
Mm.
can't actually afford anything at all. Um, and that will force everyone to rent,
Uh-huh.
which then brings in this idea when you're renting that you can, within a limited space of time, change everything that you need to change.
Mm.
And flexibility is important. And you know, what are the key most important choices in life? Your Where you live, what you do,
Health.
and the most important choices. The most important choices are, um, you know, where you live, what you do, um, and who you do it with. Right, right. Now you said health as well, so
Mm.
you can include health as an option, but let's just assume that if you choose the right place and you do the right job and you're with the right people, you're going to be healthy anyway, because
Mm.
everyone's going to make healthy
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can have friends that drink orange juice, or you can have friends that drink bottles of vodka, right? It's probably better to have friends that drink orange juice in general, right? Vodka every now and then, but uh, it depends on, you know, the people and their skills and ability to measure things. So so the same way that I think things, as we know in life, things can change like that, right? So, and then that can be for health as well. One day you're fine, next day you go to the doctor, and doctor says, "Oh dear, problem," right? And your world changes. So, so when looking at property, I think it's always a buyer's market, and that this rush to get a property is always artificially created. Yeah. And there's a great fear. The fear is that if you have a property, you won't be able to sell it or resell it. And so this artificial scarcity is created that everybody wants it. But that's not even a guarantee that it's going to be okay.
Mm.
What if your neighbors are dickheads, right? Excuse my language, but it happens, right? What if what if the people next door to you, they want to have parties all the time, and that's fine when you're a student, but when you're older, you want a bit more peace and quiet. Um, or what if their lifestyles are different? What if the people next door have lots of kids and the noise from the kids is disturbing for you? That is something that upsets a lot of people. Um, what if your neighbors are not clean people and their garden is always full of rubbish, and we see that happens sometimes. What if they don't update or upkeep their house? What if their neighbors decide that your property is their property? Yeah, because everything belongs to everyone, or it did under communism, right? So I'm just borrowing your whatever. So there's a lot of factors that are really, really, really important in choosing a place to live, and choosing a place to live is the center of the focus of your life. In many ways, in many ways, you can lose your friends and be okay. It's difficult, but it's okay. You lose your job, still be okay.
Mm.
But if you lose the central focus of where your life is, which is your home, where do you start every day? You know, in one place. And where do you finish every day? In the same place. And if that place isn't paradise, then life is stressful and a lot of time is wasted.
Mm.
And for that reason, I always advocate that people choose as much flexibility as possible, and look at the fact that it doesn't really matter so much where you live, as long as you're able to change where you live. The same way that you can do to a certain extent with jobs, right? If you if your job is really not working for you, then you can look at other options.
Mm.
And I know a lot of people who have chosen places to stay. They're not happy and they're stuck. And maybe it depends on a person's ability to balance it up and measure it and take the good with the bad. And I've lived in 23, I think now, different places in my life. And I think I'm able to balance up the pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages of those things. I've owned a house, I've rebuilt a house, I've sold a house. Yeah, and in Slovakia, right, just to make it even more difficult, in Slovakia. And I personally am much happier renting. Now, I know there's if you rent, you're just giving your money to other people, or you're paying somebody else's mortgage or something like that. And I understand that, and there's some truth in that.
Mm.
And so there is in property some kind of possible long-term advantage, some kind of great personal investment if you do that. It's also a giant, it's also like the car thing, right?
Mm.
I mean, it is the difference between having your own car and having a company car. It's like, wow, they're different. They're completely different animals, right? Having your own car is a much bigger responsibility than having the company car, because the company will take care of a few things. You still have some responsibilities, but it's much better to have the company car. So there's a lot of stuff to think about with that, and I think it's much better to do business with people who are on a level with you and are not going to say, well, if you because you know exactly what's going to happen. You're smart. You're going to, if you offer more money, they'll go to the other people and say, well, these people have offered more money. And then you're going to, and then you all lose. Everybody loses except the estate agent, who's getting some percentage of the sale fee.
Yes.
You just want, what easy job, right? Any estate agent who tells me their life is difficult, I don't believe them. Don't believe them. Right. What is it? I mean, what was it I gave my estate agent? Like the percentage on the property that I sold, they got something like 3,000 crowns or something. And the amount of work that they put into it was, I estimate, less than 10 hours, right?
Mm.
The estate agent through which I sold my house, the amount of work that they put into it was less than 10 hours, and they got about 3,000 crowns out of it. Good job, right? Good job if you can get 3,000 crowns in about 10 hours. A day's work. 3,000 crowns for a day's work. I understand you don't sell a property every day, but you could if you actually worked properly. Right? It's not exactly difficult. So I think you gotta work with people you really trust in that area, and you have to be prepared to wait as well. How long did I spend looking for? I spent like a year looking for a house.
Mm.
A year. Now, not every day, but I dedicated part of my weekend, every weekend for a year, to finding a house to buy. So that meant that part of my Saturday or part of my Sunday, every weekend for a year, was getting in the car and driving to properties to look at properties.
4 years.
For 1 year.
One.
1 year. Right. 1 year. And after 1 year, I found one property. Now, I could wait and look out for more properties, but I looked at the pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages and thought, okay, well, let's do this. And it was interesting. Had a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. The bottom line for me is that the property is never worth what you pay. You're always overpaying. It's never worth it. It's never worth it because of this. Remember, you're buying a problem. That's what you're buying. You're buying a problem. You're not buying a solution. You're giving somebody your money and buying a problem. You're solving somebody else's problem. That's what you're doing. By buying a house, you solve another person's problem by giving them money to solve whatever problem they need to solve. And for that reason, it should be a buyer's market. Everything is overpriced. Do you remember the story you told me about going to a market in Turkey and negotiating? Yeah, it was years ago. You told me that story years ago, right? I remember that story because that was a great story and there was a great message in that story. And that's the story that you should use with your marketing teams, right? That story. Because that's a great story, which is the story where the first price that's set is something, I don't know, I can't remember. It's like, I want 300 euros for this. And you're like, I'll give you 30. Right? And you negotiate, but it's always a buyer's market. And people forget that. Okay, here's
it was sorry, but it was my idea that I will try that I will try to negotiate lower price.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to approach it. Look, if someone says, oh, okay, I want 100,000 for this house or whatever, or 120,000 or however much, right? To go to them and say, look, no disrespect, but I'll give you 50. And they'll laugh. But that's okay. Because it's your money. You're solving their problem. They could say like, oh, we're solving your problem by giving, no. You're taking on a big problem by buying a property. You're taking on the building of the house and the builders and the water and the electric and fixing and repairing and maintenance and permissions and 10 years of, you know, all your hair goes white, right? Because it's so much stress. Unless you're in a situation where you're employing somebody else to take care of that for you and do all of that, right? A lot of people can't afford to employ somebody else to do that, but unless you're employing someone else to do that, all you're going to get is stress. Another great word for stress in English is grief. You're going to get a lot of grief. There's going to be a lot of tears, right? Yeah. And so here's my point. Why pay money to have lots of stress? Why pay money to have lots of stress? The power is with the people. Always get stuff twisted. Power is not with the government. Power is with the people, right? People think that the power in human relationships between men and women, people think that the power is with the men. Who says yes or no? The man is like, will you marry me? The woman is like, let me think about it. And the man is like, just crying. No. But the point I want to make is, the woman gets to say yes or no, right? It's the woman who gets to say yes or no. That puts all the power with her. That puts all the power with her. And the man in that situation is powerless. Do you remember the stories about Roman emperors and the Colosseum and the Christians and the lions fighting against each other? And the emperor would say, he lives or he dies. Do you know those stories? Okay. So in the Roman times of the past, they had these big colosseums and these big battles, and you know, there would be different warriors fighting against each other. You've seen the film Gladiator, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing, and you know, at the end of the battle, the emperor would decide if the person lives or dies. You know?
Yes.
And well, that's the woman in the relationship, right? She says yes or no. Right? She decides if it lives or dies. The power rests with her to make that decision when the man says, will you marry me? So people think the power dynamic is very often reversed from how people see it. And in terms of the housing market, how this plays into the housing market is that all the power is with the buyer. All the power is with the buyer. And the seller will act like, I have something that you want. It's like, no, you don't. You don't. Because what you want is my money. Right? And what you're giving me in return for that is a problem. Why should I pay for a problem? No, everybody needs a place to live. I get that. But there's a bigger picture here of all the uncertainty, of all the things that we don't know in the future, of the great risk involved. And think about the risk of buying a property, not knowing what will be in the future. Massive risk. If I still had my business in Slovakia, which was a walk-in, open-door school, right? When the global pandemic health crisis hit, my school would have been destroyed. Okay, my school would have been destroyed. It was not a state school, it was a private school, and my private school would not have survived. Not only would my private school not have survived, but I would not have been able to take the money from the school and use it to pay the mortgage on my house. I would have lost my house. Right? The risks involved in the property market are huge and are very dependent upon other things happening around about. And all the power is with the individual who has the ability or access to resources. And that is when someone like you goes to the bank, or you and your partner go to the bank and you say, we want to buy a house. And, you know, this is how much money we've got and we'd like to pay it back over 10, 20, 30 years, whatever. And that's putting power in the hands of the buyer, because the truth is that the people who are selling don't want to help you. They want to help themselves to your money. They want to help themselves to your resources, to your finance, to your work, because you're mortgaging your future when you buy that property. They want to walk away with the money that you're projected to earn in 10 years. That means that all the power has to be with you. Because in 10 years' time, you're going to be working to pay money that you gave to somebody else. Unless somebody's got a huge amount of resources already, or they plan to buy and sell properties relatively quickly. The prices of most new properties only go up, and as you pointed out at the beginning, what's the number one key to property? It's location. Yeah, I think that's stupid, but here's what people do. People put the postcode. People just put the postcode into Google and find out what the relative values are in certain areas. It's crazy, but a house functions on a similar but smaller principle to the principles that restaurants and hotels function on.
Mm.
Location, location, location. Without the right location, the property has zero value. Will always have zero.
Yeah.
And will always have zero value. And that is why, and this is where I would advise people to do things that I do not do, because I go in the opposite direction because it's more interesting for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I chose to rent and to live near the sea, in what I think is a nice place. And I would advise people to buy in the city, buy in the bigger cities, because the property, you're guaranteed to make a profit. You're guaranteed to make a profit on the edge of Bratislava. You're guaranteed to make a profit on the edge of Prague. And just the historical value alone of saying, my property is 1 hour from Prague, or an hour and a half from Prague, or even 2 hours from Prague, it's just huge. It's just huge. And I think, and it's like this property here where I am at the moment, when we rented this place originally, it was empty for 6 months. Nobody could rent it. The owners couldn't rent it. Nobody wanted it because it's in a place where people don't want to live. Like, because people want to congregate and be in the center of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. I understand that. I always go in the opposite direction because it's more interesting. But this idea that with property you buy a problem, and that you're attempting to solve somebody else's problem and create a problem for yourself, that should put you in a great situation of power. And the craziest thing in the world, people fighting over properties. Yes, where you live is important, but you know what's more important? Who you live with, right? Because if you're living with the right person, you can live anywhere. It doesn't really matter that much. I know a husband and wife, and they run a company, and they live in a small flat, and I mean small flat, 1 bedroom, 1 living room, 1 kitchen, 1 small bathroom. It's small. They run their own company, and they have done for 20 years. And it's in it's in Radvan. That's where it is.
Yeah.
They have a small flat in one of those big blocks of flats in Radvan. They have a small window in their kitchen, living room, and they look out. They see Urpin, and it's a nice view. They have a tiny little balcony there. Their flat is half the size of my flat here. They are very happy. Very happy. And they made a very smart move. They bought a small property in the center. Really smart move. Really. And now, of course, if you're a new family and you have children and you want them to have space, and it's nice to have a garden for them to run around in, and it's nice to have a garden when you have friends who come and visit, and you can have a barbecue and do all those other little things. But you're constantly buying a problem. One of those, what's that skiing area next to Bistrica? You go through a number of little villages, right? One of them has a famous theater in the village. It's a Divadlo. It's one of those little villages which is quite expensive to live in, and it's nice in summer and winter. Anyway, I have a friend in one of those villages. There's like 2 villages you drive through, and he bought a small piece of land there, built a house, nice house with his partner, and I think 2 children they have. And they bought it, and it's next to it's a really nice house. It's next to the little river there, and it's a nice location. It's a row of houses, and it's the last house on the row, and spent a lot of money on it, and was very happy with there for the first year. And then he discovered that behind the house is a very, 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 very big hill, and it's very steep. It's like a cliff, right? And at the top of that is the rubbish dump area. It's where all the rubbish goes. Smetisko, something like that.
Yeah.
It's at the top there. And what happens is when the local organization comes and dumps all the rubbish, it all falls down into his garden. It falls down from the hill and the cliff into his garden. And his garden gets full of all the rubbish from the rubbish dump. The Smetisko there. You see, you can't imagine the kinds of problems that you're going to have. There you bought a beautiful house and beautiful piece of land, built the house, absolutely fantastic, and then discovered that it was just basically raining rubbish into his garden a couple of times every week. And there's nothing he could do about it. He complained, but the progress is slow. So I think it's better to create as much flexibility as possible when looking at different property options. And in the digital age, I would say to people, it doesn't matter so much where you live in the digital age, but you better find a place that you can still exchange for another place if things go wrong. And although location is the key factor in the property, there's a lot of things that you can't control that are going to happen around that. And so people need to not give their money away in that situation, but hold on to all the resources that they have. And think very carefully about the future.
Yes.